Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahasaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, we bow to all of you. We ask your blessings on our life of service. May we be your instruments of love and joy. Om. Peace. Amen. Thank you. Thanks. I am the bubble, make me the sea. I am the bubble, make me the sea. Make me the sea, oh make me the sea. Make me the sea, oh make me the sea. Wave of the sea, dissolve in the sea. Wave of the sea, dissolve in the sea. I am the bubble, make me the sea. I am the bubble, make me the sea. So thou, my Lord, so thou, my Lord, thou and I, never apart. Thou and I, never apart. Wave of the sea, dissolve in the sea. Wave of the sea, dissolve in the sea. I am the bubble, make me the sea. I am the bubble, make me the sea. Make me the sea, oh make me the sea. Make me the sea, oh make me the sea. Wave of the sea, dissolve in the sea. Wave of the sea, dissolve in the sea. I am the bubble, make me the sea. I am the bubble, make me the sea. So thou, my Lord, so thou, my Lord, thou and I, never apart, never apart. Wave of the sea, dissolve in the sea. Dissolve in the sea. I am the bubble, make me the sea. I am the bubble, make me the sea. Make me the sea, oh make me the sea. Make me the sea, oh make me the sea. Wave of the sea, dissolve in the sea. Wave of the sea, dissolve in the sea. I am the bubble, make me the sea. I am the bubble, make me the sea. I am the bubble, make me the sea. Oh, I am the bubble, make me the sea. Let's sit upright.
How should we best view you, your work, your presence with us for our spiritual advantage?
As a brother disciple of Master, I had the advantage you didn't have of knowing him personally. I have had experiences in that sense that you can't share except through me, but I think that's all I ever want to be, as his disciple. All the work that I've done has been done really just in his name. I haven't any desire to do something of my own, but I do have an intense desire to get his work out, to get it known and understood, because the more can you hear me in the back without my talking loudly? The more I study his teachings, the more absolutely thrilled I am by how perfectly they answer every dilemma that I can see in Indian history, in Western history, in the history of religion, in so many different fields. I don't think of myself as meaning anything really except as someone who is trying to help make what he brought as clear as possible. And I think in that I can serve. I know when Master told me your work is writing, lecturing, and editing, and I said, well, haven't you written all that needs to be written? And he looked a little shocked with my stupidity. He said, don't say that. Much more is needed. And I see now that a great deal more is needed just to get his message clear, to get it out there, to help people to understand how it relates pertinently to every field of life. And just in little ways, he's helped to bring clarity to a field. For example, the Buddha came and sort of told people don't pay too much attention to the karma kand of the Vedas, which the karma kand is that aspect of the Vedas that is not philosophical, but you do these ceremonies in order to gain power, success in your work, in victory, children, good wife, good husband, all these worldly goals. That's the karma kand. And in fact, it's an interesting thing because that whole thing came down from a higher yuga. And so it was natural for the masters at that time to give people ways that would be pertinent in a spiritual way. Now, people think if you want to succeed in any of these things, they give you techniques, material techniques. Then it was more ceremonies, rituals, and they all had a spiritual power. Partly they were to attune to the different gods, the different rays of the divine for these different things. And Master, in fact, in his Gita did say, it was interesting to me, that the worship of the devas, as they did at Findhorn, worshipping the flower devas and so on, this is a good thing to do. It's a lower thing to do, but we should show gratitude to a higher power for everything that comes to us. And this is a way of doing that. The devas were telling the caddies that the reason food doesn't have the same value is that the devas are beginning to withdraw. People have ignored them, and so they aren't interested. Well, I read something very interesting in some, I forget, nutritional magazine or something, that they find that the nutrition in spinach 80 years ago was much stronger than it is now. That you need bowlfuls to give you the same nutrient value as you'd get in one bowlful back in the 30s, let's say, or earlier. And the reason for that, according to this way of looking at it, would at least be partly not just chemicals in the soil and all that, but also that the devas aren't putting life force into it. We just have this corpse and not the life. Well, this was the thing that in a lower age it was important that Buddha came and teach people, don't look for that as your way, because people are using it too much. The purpose of the Vedas giving us those rituals, Master explained it, was so that people who would pursue those goals anyway would be grateful to spiritual principles for helping them to fulfill their material desires. And there were rituals for even destroying your enemies and so on. Not the sort of thing you'd normally associate with religion, but it had its place at that time. Buddha sort of talked against all that and got people to think in terms of what you need to do to grow. It's not enough to just propitiate the deities and have them give you various blessings. You've got to develop your own integrity, your own clarity. It was not as if he was teaching something revolutionary. Rather, it was that man needed a reminder of this truth, which he didn't need before. And it was much more important when he lived to emphasize what man can do in order to grow, rather than waiting for God to do it all. Well, the difficulty with this, every master who came to correct misunderstandings. And by correcting, he emphasized one aspect instead of many aspects. So the aspect that Buddha did in emphasizing the way of self-perfection and so on, he didn't talk about God because they would have immediately thought gods. They would have immediately thought, what can we get out of them for blessings? As one time when Master was scolding one of the disciples, and the disciple said, well, I would like to change, Master, I want to change, but how can I do it without your blessings? Master said, my blessings are there already. God's blessings are there. It's your blessings that are lacking. And this is what we need to learn always, that Buddha came to teach that, but we need to understand it too, because even today in India, they have the word kripa, which means grace. And when I'd tell this story in India to people, before I gave the Master's reply, oh, what a beautiful reply, that how can I do it without your grace and your blessings? Then I'd tell the Master's reply. It was very important. And here too, there's a great deal of thought in Christianity that the important thing is that you just let God do it all. Man is not saved by works. They keep quoting that to you without proper understanding. And that's what they have against yoga, that you're presuming to do it on your own when God has to do it all. You can't do anything, as a result of which they don't do anything, and how can they grow? They don't. So the result of that was that Buddha, when he didn't talk about God, left his followers with the impression that he didn't believe in God. And so Buddhism became an atheistic religion, which it isn't. Originally, it wasn't meant that way, but Buddhists today are basically intellectual, all for personal effort, but they don't think in terms of devotion. They don't think of God. In fact, I read a tract or treatise or something or other in Thailand many years ago in 1958, in which it, excuse me a second, in which the spokesman for the Buddhist religion there was comparing that with the Ananda of Hinduism, the Ananda. And he was saying, well, yes, it's true, you do get a momentary joy when you're out of everything, but then everything ceases and you become nothing. Well, what this simply means is that nobody's going to work very sincerely for that state of nothingness. As a result, you really find that the Buddhists concentrate a great deal more on not being reincarnated as a spider or something and trying to find a better life after this life. But they've left out something that Buddha had, that state. He knew that state. But of course, he was also trying to emphasize that God is not 10-armed or 4-armed or all these different things. He's much more than that. And in the teaching of the Buddhists, they got away from the idea that there is a vast consciousness. So Shankaracharya came a few centuries after Buddha, and his goal, his mission, was to show that there is a God, but that it's an infinite consciousness. It is not gods like Vishnu and Shiva and so on. These are really just symbols. Or, Master said also, they are aspects of Om. Brahma, Vishnu and Shiva are different, distinct vibrations of Om. But all of these, the statue of the goddess Kali, for example, with her 4 arms, that's all very symbolic. You know the symbolism, I suppose, don't you, of Kali? Basically, it's that her husband, Shiva, is lying prostrate on the ground. Excuse me. She's dancing, but she's got her foot on his chest, and it looks to the uninitiated as if this is the triumphal destruction of the husband, and you can read all sorts of crazy things into it. Doesn't mean that at all. She is vibratory creation. That's why you have her hair spread out like that, which means energy. And she's dancing all over creation. Her 4 arms are different aspects of Mother Nature: the creation, destruction, preservation, and the giving of the gift of salvation to those who worship her for that, and don't worship her as Mother Nature for the gifts she can give. And when she touches, you see, Shiva represents the spirit beyond vibration. When the vibration, the dance of creation, touches the breast of Shiva, the dance stops. And you see her tongue lolling out. People think that means she's being bloodthirsty. It doesn't mean that. It's a symbol. It's a gesture that you find especially in India, but you do it here too. I found it in other countries. When you make a mistake, you bite your tongue. Isn't that so? It's distinctly an Indian gesture that when you've made a mistake, So what it means is, I can't go any further. My dance stops now because I've touched the breast of infinity. It's a beautiful symbol. And the garland of skulls means she's present in all minds. There's a very deep meaning to it. But Buddha was saying, quite rightly, don't think that that's God. Those are symbols of God and of aspects of God. And Shankaracharya came along to say that, of course, this is true, but you've got to understand that God is a consciousness. And he was saying that this Satchidanandam is the essence of what God is: existence, consciousness, bliss. Well, this is what all of us really want in life. And that's the essence of Master's book, The Science of Religion, which I'm hoping to rework to make it more legible. You know the story of that, don't you? I told it to many of you, but you weren't all there. Well, I can tell it briefly. Back in 1955, Laurie Pratt, that was Taramata, we used to talk on the phone. She always talked to people on the phone because she was a sort of a hermit. But boy, she could talk on the phone. Anyway, she said that she was thinking of dropping the publication of Science of Religion. I said, my God, why? That's a central part of Master's teaching. And she said he never really wrote that book. Well, I was surprised because it's so central to his mission. And I didn't know quite what to do with it, but I said, it's so central, how can we drop that book? So I guess maybe she listened to me and they didn't drop it. But years later in India, I met Swami Satyananda, and he was talking to me, reminiscing about stories of Master when he was a boy. He knew Master as a boy. And he said that when he was in Japan, on his way back from Japan, he got this inspiration for how he could express his mission to the world and to the West, because he knew he would be coming here. And because in those days he didn't know English well enough to write it, and Dhirananda had an M.A., and he was a brother disciple of Satyananda, but Master asked him if he would take his notes and put them in written form to make a short little book out of it. So that's what happened. He was, in fact, the ghostwriter. It was Master's notes, Master's ideas. Dhirananda gave it verbal expression. And I think all of you who have managed to read the book, and many have told me that they couldn't read it at all, have said that it was very pompous, pedantic. Well, Tara said that's what he was like. He was a pompous pedant, and he was very proud of his learning, and Master accepted that because he couldn't express it well himself, but I could see why Tara wanted to drop it, and it would be a pity to drop it because it is so central to his work. So it occurred to me with that background that maybe I could be another ghostwriter and put it in such a form that would be more enjoyable to read, giving the same truths and putting them in less pedantic and more inviting words. So that's what I've been working on lately. Well, I think you all know to some extent the message of that book, which is really a great message. He pointed out that the one thing, everybody wants the same thing in life. Some people like it in one form, some in another form. But everybody is trying to seek two things. One, to avoid pain, and the other is to find happiness. And why do we want happiness? Because it's a reminder of who we really are. There isn't anybody who wants to be miserable. Everybody wants happiness in one form or another. And this was Master's sort of expansion on what Shankaracharya taught. Shankaracharya said that we want to exist, we want to be conscious of our existence, we want to enjoy our existence. And whereas there are many definitions of God as infinite, omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent, all these things they're impressive, but they don't touch the heart. They don't make you say, I've got to know him. They make you bow in awe. They make you think, well, this is great stuff, but you don't take it personally. The beautiful thing about Satchidananda is that it is exactly what everybody is seeking. So Master explained that in more up-to-date terminology. He said that God is ever-existing, ever-conscious, ever-new bliss. And that bliss it's more than happiness. Happiness is an emotional state which has its opposite. But bliss is that state behind happiness that is serene, untouched, it's of the soul. Well, anyway, Shankaracharya taught this, and he said that everything is Advaita, everything is non-dual. There is only that one Satchidanandam, that one Advaitic or non-dual reality of spirit. Everything else is an illusion. Well, people took that too far. First of all, they decided that, well, you can't do anything wrong because it's all an illusion anyway, which was, of course, a ridiculous misinterpretation. Secondly, that if God is that and this life doesn't exist, then you don't need to meditate. It's all very impersonal, and so there's nothing to have any devotion toward. They forget that Shankaracharya wrote a whole scripture of hymns to the Divine Mother. In fact, many Hindus have quoted to me the stropha from that scripture. Bad sons there are many, but never has there been a bad mother. Well, of course, we know there are plenty of bad mothers in this world. What he means is there has never been a bad Divine Mother. She's always there, always ready to receive our love, always giving her love to us. But you can't think of the Divine Mother and be Advaitic. So he was showing the truth of Dvaita and Advaita, dualism and non-dualism as one, but his followers ignored that and made it all just sort of a very cold, very unfeeling kind of thing, and almost sort of removed the thought of, well, the Advaitins become very stern and cold and intellectual, but there's also the thought that why should I meditate? I'm perfect already, which of course everybody knows they aren't. Nonetheless, they sort of undermine the need for, or the thought of the need for meditation. So then Ramanuja came a few centuries later, and he pointed out that the self is eternal, the soul is eternal, that there's always that self adoring the infinite. Well, this was a little bit of Dvaita, but it was pushed further by Chaitanya, who talked only of Dvaita and talked only of devotion and got away from that non-dualism. If you talk to any of the Hare Krishna people, they'll say, oh, you're a non-dualist, as if it were condemning you to outer hell. This is something wrong. It's all sectarian stuff. The masters don't have any of that, but the followers pick up on it. So to the Hare Krishnas, God is blue and he plays a flute. This is obviously not at all close to what Shankaracharya was saying, but they say Shankaracharya was wrong. This is their misunderstanding. But what Master did was show how all of these things really are true. And that was a very special addition he gave, even, and this was the marvelous thing, that even in the fact of the soul, he says that when you achieve liberation, then you realize that it was God who became Rick Bonin or each one of us, and then became God again. But you never lose your memory of having been God as Rick Bonin. You never lose the memory of having gone through that particular series of incarnations and then become the infinite self again. So you never lose that self, that ego, in this exalted sense. It's God who became the ego, becomes God again, but that little separateness of memory is always there. So you see, he pulled these things together. Then you find in the same thing with the Christian sects and so on, how he brought all of them, he gave reason to all of them, showed how each one of them was important. He was not at all sectarian. I know one time Tara said to me, I know Master said, we aren't a sect. Well, we are a sect. Well, we are not a sect. He showed how the truth is in all of them. He wasn't partial to any. And this was the essence of his teaching. They've made it very sectarian, but we've tried, and I've tried, and this is again what I'm trying to do with my life, to show how Master brought this truth into all aspects of it. So how should you see me? Just as an older brother on the path. I've obviously, you don't know him. It certainly can't hurt to try to tune in to how I see him, because Daya will see him in one way, and Anandamayi will see him in one way. You're drawn here to me because you like the way I see him. I think that's a valid thing to understand, that my understanding of Master has a particular appeal to you. When you hear them telling stories about Master, I've been kind of appalled. Either they make him out to seem so cute and ridiculous, or they make him out to be so harsh and dictatorial, and he was so sweet and loving. It's just, that's not the Master I knew, but I knew that he could be many things. Nonetheless, I know when Mitrananda, when all of us went down there, and he was saying, oh, sure, we know all the stories about how Master threw a broom across the room. Well, you wouldn't throw a broom across the room unless you were angry. What's the point? Master never got angry. I wrote him a letter, which of course he never answered. I said, listen, when you tell a story like that, then explain it so that the readers, the listeners, aren't left with the impression that he lost his cool, because he never did. Sometimes he could express himself in such a way as to make a lesson. You know, he sometimes had to talk sternly. That wasn't his inner nature. I'd look into his eyes, and there would always be a sense of regret that he had to scold. But he was so strong and yet sweet. And I've passed my entire life trying to tune in with him, trying to understand what he wanted. You certainly can't go wrong trying to tune into my attunement, because it helps to make him more real to you. So that could be a part of my answer too. Okay? I think that's probably enough for that. Yes.
Swamiji, would you speak to ways in which we could remain...
That we could what?
That we could remain present and conscious in every moment?
You know, it isn't only that we are trying to find bliss at the end of the road. We have to learn to live with bliss. So the more we can feel joy in what we do, the usual tendency of all human beings is to think, well, I'll get this out of the way and then I'll be happy, isn't it? Well, we should be doing this with happiness. We should be trying to do it with bliss. And one way to do that is to keep Master's presence there, to chant, to talk to him, to ask him questions. All of these things are important. I always try to think, well, what would Master do in this situation? Not just what would Master do, what would you do? I talk to him. Make him second person. What would you do? What do you want? These things help to make it more present. But honestly, the more you can live what you're trying to reach instead of waiting till you reach it, the more you'll find you're there already. Because these things come in through the back door. It isn't as though you were waiting at the front for him suddenly to appear. The more you've got your home ready, the more you find he's there. So keep that consciousness of bliss in everything. That means even when you're having a hard time, just think of God being there, and he'll be there. Any other? Yes, Sid.
It's come fairly natural for me to build a rapport with Divine Mother, but it's occurred to me in the past couple of weeks that perhaps I've neglected building a rapport with Master quite as much.
Okay, one time Anandamayi, Anandamayi, I think it was he asked Master, should I think of you or should I think of Divine Mother? Master said, think of Divine Mother. But what I've tried to say is that there really isn't a dichotomy. Master is Divine Mother is Master. It's all the same, but think of Divine Mother, that's fine. The only thing is, don't feel that you're hiding from Master. He's her instrument, you might say. Yeah, that's an important point, actually. But many a disciple prefers thinking of him. It doesn't have to be one or the other, and that was Master's own answer. I know another answer that Master gave. Norman said to him, because he was confused on this point, and he asked Master, he said to Master in this note, when I see you, I just see Divine Mother. And Master didn't answer the way you might expect somebody, oh, don't look at me kind of thing. He just said, then behave accordingly. We should see that. But is it easy? No, it really isn't. And he himself, it's all a game in a way. But I remember he was standing closer to me, about as close as you are to me. And I was thinking, yeah, but he's not there, he's here. And Master came up to me. I was trying to sort of keep my eyes inward. He came up to me and gave me an apple with a very knowing smile. Also, one thing that you notice is that when I talk to devotees, it's different from when I'm talking to the general public. And I think all of you who, when you have to talk to the general public, have to tune into where they are. It's harder to do with a room in which at least half the people are our own people. But it's a different kind of approach, because you try to think, where do these people come from and how can I help them, rather than... I remember, however, I was in Australia and some crazy person she was supposed to be organizing my talk in Gold Coast, is it? Huh? That's Africa, isn't it? Huh? No, but it was beneath that. Gold, I think. I'm not sure. Anyway, I knew the woman. I would never have asked her to arrange the thing. She was one of these airy-fairy, oh, everything's beautiful, everything's nice, and end up all for her own benefit. Make it seem as if she's doing it all just for God, and what's in it for me was always the background. And so anyway, she had this hall right next to a gambling casino with glass French doors so that you could see the slot machines. And it was the craziest setup. I absolutely refused to speak on the level that you'd expect. I just talked about devotion. I just talked to the Divine Mother, and I paid no attention to it all, and I'm sure that most of them didn't like it. I didn't care. I thought, no, I'm going to talk the way I want to. And if they're going to put me in an environment I don't want, then I'm not going to accept that that's where I am. And I know somebody asked me this long, involved, intellectual question. I said, I don't know. I said, all I know is I'm in love. But normally, if I had chosen, it wouldn't have been that place to start with. But you have to talk differently to different crowds. Well, you know, the beautiful thing about our friendship is it's basically impersonal, and much more loving because of it. It's when you can love in an impersonal way, what that means is not that I don't care for you. It means that I don't care for me. I don't think, what can I get out of you? I think, what can I give to you? That's what I mean when I say impersonal. There's no ego or selfish interest. It's all, how can I help? And that's what I see in Ananda communities, that people are not thinking, oh, why is he treating me this way? Why didn't he talk differently to me? They're not thinking that way. How can I help this fellow? How can I be? That's what it's really about. But with that attitude, communities grow. And in that way it was impersonal. But I told stories that I've been through, and if you want to call those personal, but they're good examples. I've always enjoyed that Italian bank one. I've had fun with those things sometimes. I came through customs in New York, and I had a lot of paintings of Odiernas. I didn't know what I'd have to do with that. Besides which, once you get caught paying duty, you spend hours. They want to go through every toothbrush, see if it's hiding something. And so anyway, I didn't fill out the form to say how much total value. And she said, well, why didn't you fill that out? And I said, well, I was waiting to see how creative you'd let me be. And she laughed, and this other woman there said, oh, I like that spirit. And finally she said, well, would it be too dishonest if I just wrote the maximum aloud? And I said, well, not too dishonest. So she let me through. But I think some stories like this they're more meaningful than if I told, gave a Wall Street statistic or something. Always lectures they're more meaningful if you tell stories like that. But that's not personal in the same way. If it had been self-laudatory, that would be more personal. But it's not related to me, it's just something that happened. Well, it makes it a lot more real to them. Listen, we've all lived through it. We have a right to talk about it. And if we were just saying, well, when one forms a community, one finds that. Or X number of people have tried in certain statistical situations, that's not going to win people. Really, you have to bring a talk down to a level that is human. And whatever people expect, I hope they like it better at the end than they would have if it had been just a dry. In Italy, almost every speaker reads his talk. And what a boring thing it is. Very few people read well. Very few people write well. They read something badly, which is already badly written. The way we speak is spontaneous and people love it. We're living in a satanic age. There's a lot of that influence around it. No prayer in the school. What a terrible thing. And there's a lot of darkness in the world today, and it's growing. But the light is growing too. And the sad thing is that the people who speak on behalf of this country are not the people of this country. The intellectuals, the lawgivers, most of them are not religious, or if they are, it's in a narrow sense. But there's a lot of spirituality in this country. When I was in India in 1960 and had to come back to this country, I really felt pain to have to come back here because I thought of all the materialism and all that. And then Divine Mother arranged that some woman would come to the place where I was staying. She was from Oakland, and she was a devotee. And it reminded me of how many sweet, wonderful, devoted souls there are in this country. This is America, and it isn't what speaks for America, unfortunately, but you find a lot of it here. In fact, they say that 95% of Americans believe in God. You'd never get that idea if you talk to the lawgivers or read the intellectuals' books. You'd think they were all atheists. They say that, I think it's between 25 and 35% of people pray and meditate every day. That's a large percentage. You don't see that. It's sort of underground, you might say, but it's the real America. And it just pains me. What you've told me is sad. It shouldn't be. It won't last, but that darkness is still growing. And I think that it was in Medjugorje or someplace where the Divine Mother or the Virgin Mary or whatever you want to call her said that that Satan has been let loose for now. He'll be reined in, but only after a lot of suffering. And you see it rampant everywhere. This thing that happened with telecom, is that the name of it? World $3.9 billion taken fraudulently. It's there's so much greed today, and you're living in the heart of a lot of that right now. I think what you're doing is sending out rays of light that can have a tremendous impact on this very materialistic center right here. Well, I tell you, I have just finished writing a book that has just that purpose in it. Hope for a Better World. All of you read it. It's a very interesting thing because I've gone through a lot, not all, but a lot of the major influences that have led people to think that this world has no values, no meaning. It's all materialism. There is no God. You've got to get yours and so on. And I've shown how it just doesn't work. It's impractical. It isn't realistic. And I've shown how the only way to really solve this is by communities. You can't, supposing everybody from Ananda, this is something I say in that book, supposing every member of Ananda moved away to a different city, kept his values, got a job in an office or whatever, people would notice that here's somebody who's peaceful. And they might wonder why he's peaceful, but the best they'd ever get from it is that he's a special kind of person. They don't get the lesson that it's because of what he does that he's peaceful. They might say it's because he eats bran for breakfast, or they might say, well, you're a special kind of guy. But when you see many people, just like somebody said to me a few years ago, you have some wonderful people here. I said, listen, if you met one or two like that, you could say they're wonderful people. When you meet a whole community, you have to say it's what they're doing that makes them that way. Well, when you get a community of people doing it together, this is something people sit up and take notice. They think that that's what can change them too. And I draw in this book the parallel to what saved the world in the medieval times, the Dark Ages, I should say, before the medieval times. It was the monasteries. And if those people had gone off and just been hermits, it wouldn't have had the same impact. But you had a group of people living together. People felt there was something special in these people. They weren't all ready to become monks, but they were certainly influenced by the devotion, the faith, the religious focus of those lives. It was what saved Western civilization at the time of the barbarians. And I say in this book, I believe that's what's going to happen again. This is why Master was so strong for communities. He saw that when you get groups of people like Ananda, people come from all over the world. Those of us who read letters from people from different parts of the world, they say our lives are more meaningful just knowing you all are there. And we've had an impact far beyond the norm that you would think. Not just the people who come. I mean, my books and records have sold about 3 million copies. That's quite a bit. In 25 languages they've been translated. That's pretty good. But it's more than that. It's people who even hear about it, and they begin to think, well, maybe there is something in this. And maybe they go to some other line. But that influence is there, and it gives them the feeling that there is a center of meaning in life. Now, those fools in Washington can do what they like, but they're not going to take this away from the age we're living in, because we're not in a descending age. We're in an ascending age. And they're going to end up, in the end, they're going to find that they're behind the 8 ball. This is the power that's going to really influence the world. People are going to see. Now, what happens? Classical Western approach. You want something, you think it's good, you make everybody do it. And so if they don't agree, kill them. And so what have the communists done? Slaughtered 100 million people just because they disagreed with them? That's not the way to do it. But when you see a few people doing something that makes sense, you think, well, gee, why not? And I think more and more people are coming to that point. Well, I'd say that the more you can get this book spread, get it out to people, tell your friends about it. It's certainly, I don't even mention the name Ananda, as I said at my talk. I don't want people to tie it in with this. Not only that, I don't want everybody joining Ananda, for God's sakes. What a pill that would be. But if they can get that idea and think to band together, to do things together, this will change the face of the world. And I think that 100 years from now, people will look back at Ananda and say it was the most important thing happening anywhere. Because communism isn't doing it. Politics aren't doing it. Israel isn't doing it. None of them are doing it. This is the only thing that's actually giving answers, and in such a way that doesn't say you've got to do it. You've got to do it our way. We want to control you. Nothing like that. If you like it, just like Orville and Wilbur Wright, people like the fact that they could fly. Gradually it spread. Well, it took a generation. Sure, it doesn't happen quickly. I remember on the radio once I heard Buckminster Fuller. It was just a couple of months before he died, I think. He was 84. And this announcer, this interviewer, was kind of cheeky chap, I guess. He said, don't you get a little discouraged? Here you are talking and talking about these things and nobody listens? Buckminster Fuller gave a marvelous answer. He says, not at all. I'm not at all discouraged. He said it always takes at least a generation for a new idea to be accepted, and he understood that. Well, that's how it is with Ananda. However, we've been here for a generation already, and we're seeing changes. I believe these changes are far more prevalent than we can see with our own eyes. Techniques in business, of cooperation instead of competition. There's more and more of that way of thinking. There's a great deal of thinking about God, and they can be all the atheists they want, but they're not going to be able to stem this tide. And if we can show, and that's another thing that I think is very important, Master's Science of Religion, which I'm renaming for the purpose of this book, God is for Everyone. And to show it in these impersonal terms is important. I can certainly give my own testimonial that it's not everybody can start a community. It's not an easy thing to do. Lots of people have left Ananda intending to start communities, never did. And I think probably Ananda will be a very strong influence, but it'll be less so if we tell people that. Let them find that out for themselves. It's enough that they can find us. I think we're going to have a very powerful influence, because I do think that without divine center, I say this in the book too. I ask the question, is it possible to start these communities without a spiritual focus? And I say, I don't think so. I don't think so, but they'll try. And any attempt in that direction at least is a movement in that direction. But I think the core of it's going to remain a spiritual. And there are Christian groups that are trying to start communities, are doing it successfully too. How successfully, I don't know. But it's going to be a bigger movement than just this. But I do think that two things. One, God has to be the focus of it. Two, the breadth of teaching, not the sectarianism, is what people need today. Otherwise they get put off. Three, when Master said, this day marks the birth of a new era, thousands of youths must go north, south, east, west, everywhere. He was saying specifically, in fact somebody suggested, why don't we say the beginning of Ananda was that day? He said, I'm sowing these words in the ether, and my words shall not die. Well, I believe he is, in a very real sense, the patron saint of communities, and that anybody who wants to start a community and tries to tune into him is going to have much more success than if he tries to do it ignoring that. Although his power will be there anyway, but it'll be less so if it isn't conscious. But that has to take its own time. The more you toot your own trumpet, the less people want to listen. And so I say, don't say it, don't push it. If they like it, fine. If they don't, fine. Yeah. Yes.
Be that the children that are coming now and the souls that are incarnating are the ones who are going to be led.
I think that's certainly a part of it, but I think you're also the ones. And I'm also the one, and I'm getting up there. Oh, we're all a part of it. It's all a big revolving door, for God's sake. You see this cute little baby in his crib, and you think how sweet and cuddly and fresh and young. He's really as an old a soul as you are. Just coming in the door again.